Hola desde Berlín. Hi everyone. Bienvenidos a esta sesión donde hablamos en español. Welcome everyone to this session where we want to talk a little bit in Spanish as well, where we want to learn also about new things or topics that are always difficult to us. Mi nombre es David, soy de Colombia, pero trabajo en Berlín. Hoy estoy transmitiendo desde Berlín, hoy I'm broadcasting from Berlin, y estoy acompañado de mi amigo y compañero David, same name, but different place. Hi David, how are you?
Hola a todos y a todas. Y gracias por estar aquí. Thanks for being here. Yo estoy aquí en Nueva York. I am here in New York, pero soy de Nashville, Tennessee. Y quizás ustedes me han visto en los dos lugares. Perhaps you've seen me in both places if you've been watching this entire time. From the very beginning, when we've hosted these sessions, that's where I started. Pero ahora yo me he mudado a la ciudad. Now I moved back to the city, where I will be for the foreseeable future. So, David, it's great to be here with you. Everyone who is here as a returning viewer or here for the first time, so excited that you've joined us. We always love to give these sessions and answer your questions. David, dime qué está pasando en tu vida. Explica las circunstancias de qué está pasando. Tell me what's happening. Explain some of what's going on in your life.
En mi vida, todo va bien. Everything goes well. Estoy contento de estar en Berlín, donde vivo y donde trabajo. I'm very happy to be here in Berlin, where I live and where I work. Y también estoy contento porque tengo un nuevo apartamento. I'm living in a new place, in a new apartment. Y eso es emocionante. That's very exciting. But other than that, estoy trabajando mucho. Tengo muchos proyectos. Estamos haciendo estamos trabajando en el contenido de Babbel para estudiantes de español. We are working on some content for people who are learning Spanish, and that's my routine. ¿Y tú cómo estás?
Estoy bien. Yo estaba diciéndote antes, I was telling you before, que está lloviendo aquí en Nueva York, lo que es un desarrollo nuevo, which is a new development porque no ha estado lloviendo aquí muchísimo. It hasn't been raining here a lot, pero estoy contento de ver que el tiempo no está bueno. The weather's not good, but es diferente que lo que ha estado. I think I'm saying that right. It's different from what it has been, and me encanta el cambio de las estaciones. I love the change of the seasons, y espero que esta lluvia traiga tiempo más, ¿cómo se dice? Like fresco, like crisp. Yeah, so I'm hoping that this change in weather brings aire más fresco, fresher air, crisper air, y el comienzo del otoño and the start of fall. But I think that we should go ahead and just get down to business, right? Yeah, I'm ready to start this lesson. This is one of my favorites, and I hope that we can explain it in a way that makes sense. I think we've kind of touched on this a few times in past episodes, but never really devoted a full episode to it. So, David, should I explain the introduction, or do you want to take it away?
I think it's perfect that we start with today's topic. I just wanted to add this sentence to the screen because Mari says, hoy llueve en Nueva York. It's raining today in New York. So in this case, in Spanish, we have a verb, llover, which is irregular, and we don't need a subject in Spanish when we are referring to the weather. So llueve. Who? What? We don't know. It's just it rains. Um, and yeah, I think that's it. So we can start with what's the topic for today, David?
The topic for today is el imperativo, la forma imperativa. So the imperative or the imperative form de los verbos of verbs. So otherwise known as commands. These are things that you use all the time in English when you tell someone, do this, eat that, make your bed, clean your room, write me a letter, whatever you might say to someone else. You can also do that in Spanish, of course. So we want to kind of run you through the different ways to form this very special verb form. And we'll do it only today for the to form. So we know in Spanish, as we've talked about before, there are a couple different ways to say you. So it depends on if it's singular or plural, but it also depends on if it's informal or formal. And we know that the to form is reserved for informal situations where we're talking to one person only. So David, I might use the to form with you because we're friends, we're on kind of the same playing field, we're colleagues, but I might not use the to form. I might choose the usted form instead with my boss or with the elders in my family or someone whom I don't know as well if I want to be really polite. But we'll focus on that another time. Today, we just want to talk about how to inform the imperative or give commands in the to form. So this is someone to someone we view in a more equal or informal relationship. And so I can imagine wanting to give a command maybe to your child, a tus hijos, or a tu hermana, to your sister, or a tus amigos, to your friends, using well, it would just be one friend because to is singular, but you would use the to form to give commands in this context. So, David, what do you have to say about how to form the imperative for the to form?
Yeah, so I like this topic because today we are presenting the forms for to, which are the most used widely in Spanish. As you said, we use it to give commands to one person that's part of our family or a friend. So this is going to be useful, and this is the start for the imperative. So let's focus today only on the forms for to. And you're going to see that the way we use or we form the imperative, build the imperative in Spanish is very easy. And I think the best thing that we can do is let's have a look at some sentences that we prepare for today. Habla más despacio, por favor. And I think this is related to what Wendy said here before, because she appreciates it when we speak Spanish very slowly. We do it because we want you to get more familiar with listening and so on. So you can also ask us, please, habla más despacio. Speak more slowly, please. Yeah. So let's have a look here at the verb form, which is habla. And I think we all know this verb, which is hablar in infinitive, to speak, hablar in Spanish. So habla más despacio. Let's have a look at this second example sentence, which is also like really easy to understand. Trabaja un poco más. Work a little bit more. So here we have our second sentence, and I would like you to pay attention to both verbs. Here, trabajar, trabaja, and here, hablar, habla in imperative. So I'd like to ask you what the rule is here, how we build the imperative for these verbs. So both hablar and trabajar are regular verbs that end in ARR in Spanish. So as you can see, if we have a verb that ends in ar and is regular, then the only thing that we need to do is we drop the r. That's it. Yeah. So habla más despacio. Speak more slowly, please. Trabaja un poco más. Yeah. Work a little bit more. Or yeah, as Carol says here, the S is removed if we conjugate the verb for tú. Like we say, hablar, yo hablo, tú hablas. So the only thing that we do is we remove the S at the end. That's the idea. David, we have three different groups of verbs in Spanish. What happens to the verbs that end in er, or ir?
So pretty much the same thing happens, except we'll be grouping together these remaining verbs, er verbs and ir verbs, into one group. And for the most part, that's what you do when you conjugate the verbs to begin with, except for a few exceptions, like the nosotros form in the present tense. So this shouldn't be too foreign of a concept to say, okay, verbs that end in er and verbs that end in ir are going to behave similarly when we conjugate them in the imperative to form. So what we'll do is very, very similar to the AR form. We will just drop the R from the infinitive form, and we'll see that we get, for ER verbs, that gives us immediately the form, the to form that in the imperative we're looking for IR verbs. So let's look at this example here before I talk about IR verbs. But we can say something like, come una manzana, tenemos muchas. Eat an apple, we have many of them. So we know that the infinitive form of to eat is comer, and all we have to do in this case to form the command, the imperative, is to drop the R, come. So you get come una manzana, eat an apple. Okay, so then another example below is bebe un jugo conmigo, yo te invito. Drink a juice with me, I invite you. So beber means to drink, and all we do in this case is shave off that final R, and we get the imperative form bebe. Okay, so that's for ER verbs, very straightforward, just like AR verbs. IR verbs are mostly the same, except we will have the ending will change from an I when you take off that final R to an E. So a sentence, for example, would be escribe un ensayo para el examen, write an essay for the exam. We know that the infinitive for to write is escribir, which ends in IR. So we take off the final R, and that would give us escribí, but that's not the form we see here. We know that we change that final letter I from the IR verb to the letter E. Escribe un ensayo para el examen. And the same thing happens in a sentence like this. Abre la ventana, por favor. Open the window, please. The infinitive form is abrir, to open, which ends in IR. So we take off the final R, and that I actually converts to an E. Abre la ventana, por favor. Mm-hmm. So, David, I wanted to show you this comment, and everyone else, of course, that Dana has written. And she said, so you basically use the third person singular form for commands in the tu and usted forms. This is mostly right. Let's not focus on the usted form right now, just because that gets a little bit tricky and the endings change for the imperative form. But if we want to talk about only the tu form, which is the informal singular form of you, then you'll notice it looks pretty much exactly the same as this third person singular form in the present tense. So in a sentence like escribe un ensayo, we know that we're telling someone to write something. The context makes that clear, but you could also put a subject like él or ella or David or Marco, something like a third person noun or pronoun, and you could see that you actually have the same form of the verb. David escribe un ensayo para el examen. David writes an essay for the exam. Or él o ella escribe un ensayo para el examen. And then the same thing for all of these sentences we've seen before. trabaja un poco más, that is a command, but you could also put a subject before it and see that it would be a third person singular, but it would be a declarative statement. You're telling a fact instead of telling a command. So if you say, David trabaja un poco más, you'd be saying something like, David or David works a bit harder. Instead of pointing at someone, commanding them to work harder, you're using the same form of the verb. It looks the exact same, but you add a subject to it and it becomes what we would call an indicative statement. So you're just saying, declaring some statement of fact, David works a bit harder.
Yeah,
David,
I think this is a good way to remember the forms of imperative for two. They are just exactly the same for regular verbs when they are conjugated for él and ella in the present tense. So él trabaja mucho means he works a lot. But if I say trabaja mucho, then I'm saying something different. Work more. Trabaja más. And that's why Spanish is a language where we need a lot of context. Because if we see this in the written form, we need the context to understand whether it is he works more or work more. So we need to know what this sentence means in that specific case. But don't get confused. We are just saying how to extract the forms for the imperative for two. And this is a good way to remember this. Yeah, it is just we drop some endings, we drop the R or the S, depending on how we want to see it, and I think that's a good way to remember it. Yeah. So if there are no questions, you are also invited to add your questions in the comments here. But while you do it, we can also move on to the little group of verbs that have an irregular form in the imperative for two. And Marie, one of those verbs is the one that you are using here. No, it's actually not. That is not irregular. No, sorry. I'm confused. But here we have a short list of verbs that have an irregular form, imperative form for two. And we'd like to put them here. Ser, to be. Ir, to go. Tener, to have. Venir, to come. Salir, to go out. Poner, to put. Decir, to say. And hacer, to do or to make. Rita, imperative means like when you give a command, like do this, yeah, work harder, learn languages, yeah. This is a command. This is imperative. Let's take some time also to go through the sentences. This is also a good time for us to remind you of this document that we created, where we add our sentences from each episode. Please check it out because this is a good resource, good material to practice, to learn, and to review concepts that we introduced in the past episodes. So check it out. But let's go back to the irregular verbs in imperative. Like when we say, for example, go to the supermarket, we are going to use imperative, and this form is a bit different from what we saw in the past examples. And let us explain to you why. So let's start with the first verb, which is very interesting, David, isn't it? This irregular verb, as we are going to see in the example sentence, is very similar to another verb that we already know. That's the sentence. Sé un buen chico y llévale esto a tu padre. Be a good boy and take this to your father. Sé. This is similar to, it's exactly the same form as when saying I know. Yo sé. But in this case, we're going to use that form to give a command, be a good boy, you. Yeah? Sé un buen chico y llévale esto a tu padre. As you can see, we are using imperative here with the verb llevar, which means to take something. Llévale esto a tu padre. And there we are also using an object pronoun, le, which refers to a tu padre. So it's exactly, that's the same. So we hope that you see this irregular form in the beginning, say, which is exactly the same as when saying I know in the present tense.
This is also different from the topic of an entire episode we did about the little word say in Spanish, and that word say doesn't have an accent mark on it. So different meaning, pronounced the same, but keep that separate in your mind from all the little uses of say that we talked about, I think 2 weeks ago. And if you want a refresher on that, you can see the videos from before on this Facebook page or our YouTube channel. But this one is also confusing because, as David said, it means be. So it's a command, be this, be something. But it's not the same as yo sé, I know, facts, information, whatever. So there's a lot of words say in Spanish, and they all have different meanings. And some of them have accent marks and some of them don't. But in this case, we're only talking about imperative giving a command for the verb ser, which we know means to be. So that can be a very, very tricky one. And we are happy to help clarify if people have questions too on that one. But let's move on now to the next verb, which is ir. So we know ir means to go, and this is one of the most irregular verbs in all of the Spanish language. So it's no surprise that it would have an irregular form in the imperative, and we see that here. Ve al mercado, necesitamos leche. Go to the market, we need milk. So the verb ir in the to form imperative becomes ve, ve. So maybe not very intuitive, but it's kind of related to the present tense, what we'd call indicative form, va, like él or ella goes to the market, va al mercado. Instead, we're looking at someone, you, and we're saying ve al mercado, go to the market. David, what did I miss on that one?
I think it's clear what you said. Here we are talking about the verb ir, and we are going to see the irregular form of the verb venir, which is very similar, but don't get confused by that. In the meantime, we can have a look at another example sentence where we have two irregular forms. Let's start with the verb tener, as in this sentence. Ten este libro un momento y pon este otro en la mesa. Hold this book for a moment and put this other one on the table. As we can see, tener and poner, which correspond to have and to put, are irregular. And these ones are a bit easier, I would say, because here we drop the infinitive ending like er for both verbs. So tener is converted to ten, and poner becomes pon. That's easy. Ten este libro. Have this book, like hold this book, in this case in English, and put this one on the table. Pon este en la mesa. So I think this was very useful. These verbs, both tener and poner, have a very easy form to remember, although they are irregular. But what about salir and venir, David? What happens to these verbs?
So it's pretty much the same thing that we see with tener and poner, where we just drop the ending, the infinitive ending. For tener and poner, it was er because those verbs end in er. But for verbs like salir, to leave or to go away, and venir, to come, those verbs both end in ir. And luckily, we do the same thing. We just take off the ending. So we say sal ya y ven aquí. So something like leave already and come here. So that makes it easy to remember because you do pretty much the same thing as you do with tener and poner, and you just take off that infinitive ending, and then you have the form that you're looking for.
Yeah.
Sal, from salir, and then from venir.
Yeah, I see here two different questions. Let's start, I think, with Mari's sentence. Pone en su página oficial el martes. If you're trying to say, put this on your official page on Tuesday, then it's enough to say pon. Pon something, esto, pon esto en tu página oficial el martes. But it looks pretty much like something that we can understand. But just remember, if you're trying to use put this in an informal context, when you're addressing a friend or your sister, we just add pon, pon. Yeah, we ignore the ending er, poner. And Dana is asking something interesting because this is the imperative form for tú, when we have the verb ir, which is reflexive in this case, irse. So when we want to say go away, like I need my time, I need a break, then we would say vete. Yeah. And as we learned some weeks ago, when practicing the use of se, the magical word se in Spanish, se is used in some context with some verbs, especially like ir and comer, to reinforce the meaning of the action. Like ir means to go, irse means like to leave, like I'm leaving this space. Comer means to eat, and comerse means to eat up
Eat
something.
up. Yeah.
So in this case, we are using imperative with a reflexive form, and as you remember this in one of our previous episodes, we talked that when using the object pronouns or the reflexive pronouns, we attach them to the verb when we are using imperative form. So this would be a word, only a word, vete, yeah. And then I would say, okay, me voy, yeah. Okay, I'm leaving, yeah. If you don't want to see me here, me voy, yeah. I leave. So in this case, it's vete. If we want to say, if we want to use the imperative form for usted, that's another story, and we are not mentioning this today because you're going to be like, oh, no, why am I learning Spanish? And we don't want you to question this. Yeah, so let's focus today only on the forms for tú. Yeah, vete, go away. Yeah. Vete, como la canción de Bad Bunny. No conozco esa canción. I don't know that song, but if that helps you remember the form, it's perfect. Yeah, cool. And I think we can have the last sentence with the last two irregular forms, David. So here we are going to practice the imperative forms of the verbs hacer and decir. Hacer, to do, to make, and decir, to say, to tell. So we have this sentence: haz lo correcto y di la verdad. Do the right thing and tell the truth. I think this sentence is really useful. I would use it. I would just learn it by heart, just to remember that it's a nice message in Spanish, and it uses two irregular verbs in imperative: as, which is kind of it follows the same principle as we saw it in the previous verbs, like poner, pon, tener, ten, and here we also drop the ending er. So hacer becomes HAC, but there are no words in Spanish ending in C, and that's why we replace the C with Z. So as, in Spain they would say as. I cannot pronounce it. Haz lo correcto y di la verdad. Decir has a completely regular imperative form for do. So in this case, we just have to learn it the way it is, because it's also a very useful verb in Spanish. Di la verdad. Yeah. Dime qué haces. Tell me what you are doing. Yeah. So there are these cases where we can just formulate these uh, sentences that are very useful, and we can always practice this form. And that's also a good learning strategy that I don't know whether David applies it or not. I guess so, because he's an expert, and um, he speaks very, very well Spanish. But when I'm learning also something which is very difficult to remember, I just prefer not to remember the rule, but just learn a sentence. So when, for instance, when I say in English, I'm waiting for you, in Spanish, we don't use any equivalent for the word for you. So I would say in Spanish, te estoy esperando, which would literally mean I wait you. So this is a typical mistake that Spanish speakers do when translating word by word. And I think this addresses this comment that Nicolas posted before, because I think one of the first things that we do when learning languages is we try to translate word by word. And as we said in the very, very, very first episode, Spanish and English have similar systems when it comes to some parts of the grammar and vocabulary. Many, many words are very easy to identify and to learn and to use, but some others are very specific to Spanish, in your case, when learning this language. And for me, it's the opposite. So when learning English, when practicing it, when speaking it, I'm getting used to these differences. So actually, there is no secret. Learning a language is a long path, and I think one of the best ways to learn it is let's use it, let's practice it, let's ignore any fears, and let's use it, because this is the most effective way to learn a language, by using it. So don't be afraid of using imperative forms for to today after the session. And I think so. Just as a quick recap, David, these were the verbs whose imperative forms for to are irregular. Ser becomes se, which is exactly the same verb as for saying I know. So if you want to say be a good boy or I know the answer, you are saying exactly the same verb in Spanish. Sé un buen chico, una buena chica, or sé la respuesta. Ir becomes be, yeah, be. So here we can also maybe link this verb to the verb ver, to see, like when we say he sees or she sees. It's exactly the same verb, be. Tener becomes ten, venir becomes ven, salir becomes sal, poner becomes pon. So all these verbs ignore their original ending, the infinitive ending, and decir becomes di, and hacer becomes as. These are the irregular forms in imperative that we use a lot for to in Spanish. So the best way to learn them and to practice them and to remember them is through sentences. Let's try to practice them, and that's our tip for today. David, do you have anything else you would like to add?
Nope, that is great advice, David. I would say just practice, 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 and use these commands in sentences in different contexts until you have no choice but to think of these immediately. When you want to say come here, you say ven aquí. When you want to say do your homework, haz tu tarea, and just find different sentences to help you practice, and then you won't even think of the wrong answer because you'll have used the right answer so many times in so many different sentences. It'll become like muscle memory to you. And so the sentence you displayed from Mary, ven aquí, por favor, that is great. That's exactly what you should say. Come here. And so it looks like we're learning already. That's great.
Yeah. And as a sneak peek, I would say, yes, Dana, you would say vaya for usted, which is the subjuntivo. And that's why we don't want to talk about imperative for usted, because there we need different conjugation system. And the same as for salir. Phyllis is right. So in that case, if we want to say leave in a formal context, we would say salga. So that changes a lot, and that's why we don't want you to get confused by these forms, and that's why we are tackling them one by one. Yeah? So today we are starting with two, which is most frequently used in Spanish, and I think this is the perfect start when talking about imperative.
So then Ellen says, I thought you said the imperative for venir is be, as an example, vete. So if we go back to this list, we'll see that be is the imperative for ir, and ven is the imperative for venir. So important not to get those confused because they do look very similar. But I try to, whenever I'm confused about the two, I think ven looks closest to venir. And so they must kind of, by process of elimination, be the form for ir. And they also kind of looks like va, like I was saying earlier. Ella va al mercado, she goes to the supermarket. Or tú, if I wanted to tell a command to tú, I would say ve al mercado, go to the supermarket. So those verbs, kind of ve and va, both come from ir, and then venir gives rise to ven.
Yeah, that's correct, David. So I think while you keep also posting your comments, this is an interesting question. Lee is asking, okay, what's the imperativo of empezar? So it's very similar to empezar. It's empieza. It's a little bit irregular. So we changed that e, the second e, to ie. Empieza. Right? Which is the way we also conjugate this verb for he and she and usted. Like usted empieza a trabajar mañana. Yeah, you start to work tomorrow. Or empieza a hacer esto ahora. Yeah, start doing this now. Yeah. So I think this is one special case because irregular verbs in the present tense, especially for the third person singular, like empezar, like dormir, for example, to sleep, like when we want to say, go to sleep, go to bed now, duerme ya, yeah, that's going to be the form for tú. That's the form that we are going to use in Spanish, yeah. That's a good question. Thank you for sharing this Spanish. How to say thank you for sharing this Spanish translation. Gracias por compartir la traducción en español. I think that's what you need, Rev Trian. And yeah, you keep asking, and we go directly to the test, so you get ready for that as well. And if you're okay, David, everyone, we can just pause this sentence. Today we have sentences where we will be filling the gaps. So here we have a sentence, no translation. If you want to understand the context, here we are saying save money. It's important for emergency cases. So how would we say, how would we formulate this in as a command, like save money? Yeah, we want to give a piece of advice to a friend in a very friendly command. So how do we want to say this? This is a verb that ends in ar, and it's regular. And we saw in the very first example sentences that there we only need to do a thing. And this looks great.
Yeah, good work from what I'm seeing so far. So we know ahorrar, to save. I always have trouble pronouncing that word. Ahorrar is a regular verb. So like David said, there's only one thing we need to do to it. And let's go ahead and display Boris's answer, ahorra, which is the correct answer, which means save. So we just take off that final R on the verb ahorrar, and we say ahorra dinero es importante en caso de emergencia. So pretty straightforward there. We take a regular verb that ends in AR and we just chop off that A ending, or the R ending, I'm sorry, and we're left with ahorra. So
that's perfect.
Good work, everyone.
Yeah, that's amazing. So David, what's the next sentence? It's a bit more difficult than the first one.
Okay, so we have le a tu hermano que venga. So maybe we should have written a translation for this one because it can be a little tricky. But what we're trying to say is tell your brother to come. So if you wanted to really like unpack this linguistically, syntactically, it would be saying tell him, your brother, that he comes. And we don't need to focus on this form venga ahora right now because this is a completely different topic. This is called the subjunctive, which we can talk about later. But what we want to do is emphasize that we're giving a command with the verb decir, tell. So we're telling your brother, tell him, your brother, to come. And it looks like most people have gotten the right answer so far. So David, what is the right answer?
The right answer is, I think all of them are correct. So Kelly says D. Yeah. So we just need this irregular imperative form for to, which is D. And that's it, dile. Here we are using an indirect object pronoun, le, which is being double. It refers to a tu hermano. So that's the indirect object. You are telling something, you are saying something to your brother in Spanish. And that's why we use le and not lo or la, as we saw in previous episodes. So again, let's just focus on dile and not venga, because venga is another story that we'll cover soon, promise. Subjuntivo is something that everyone needs to learn to see, at least to have the first contact with. And it's going to be fantastic, I hope. But that's it. I think we can just give them a last sentence, which is going to be the homework for the next Tuesday. So this is the sentence we are going to start with next Tuesday. Siempre propongo ideas. Ahora, una idea tú. And you're going to need a hint here, which is proponer. This is the verb to suggest in Spanish. So don't get confused by that, because you need to focus on the last part of the verb, which is very similar to another irregular verb, poner, proponer. So I'm very curious to see what your answers are going to be. But this is your homework. And I hope you enjoyed this session. We hope you learned a lot. Please to share your comments, your thoughts with us, because this is a way for us to see whether you are learning or whether you're still struggling with something, and we want to help you, of course.
All right. Well, I think it's time to say goodbye until next week. In the meantime, if you want to reach out, leave comments on this video with suggestions for other episode topics in the future, or connect with us on social media. You're here on Facebook, so you know where to find us here. And you can find all of our past videos on Facebook too, I think in the videos section, but also on YouTube, and we can share the YouTube channel link as well. But then you can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok as well, at Babbel USA. And then we also have a space on Quora, Everything Language. It's growing fast. We're reaching 100,000 followers soon. So we would love for everyone here to be a part of that milestone. And then Babbel Magazine is also a great place to learn about all the different languages we offer, especially Spanish, our most popular one. So in the meantime, just, reach out to us, connect with those resources, and then tune in next week at the same time, Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, and we'll present a new topic and see you then.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you, everyone, for your attention and for your active participation. We would love to see you again next Tuesday. Please tune in. We are looking forward to our next episode. I wish you a lovely rest of the day. It's very dark here. This day is almost done here in Europe. But yeah, que tengan un buen día. Have a lovely day.
Adiós.
Adiós, David. Adiós a todos.